So you're thinking about investing in a rental property, but how do you know that what you're looking at is going to be a good deal? In this video, I'm going to go through in depth the different concepts, the rules of thumb, and the calculations involved in evaluating a rental property. And if you stick around to the end of the video, you'll see me apply these calculations to an actual property currently on the market. All that and more, coming up. Hey guys, if we're just meeting, my name is Vitaly Volpov. I'm a practicing attorney, an active real estate investor, and a part owner of a real estate brokerage in upstate New York. I've been investing in real estate for the last 9 years, and I currently own a 56-unit rental portfolio. On this channel, I discuss relevant legal concepts as well as best strategies and tips for real estate investing and personal finance. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so that YouTube notifies you of all my future content. If you enjoy the content in this video, hit the like button and comment down below. And as always, whenever I'm discussing legal or financial topics, just remember, nothing that I say in this video should be construed as legal or financial advice. I provide this information for educational and entertainment purposes only, and you should always consult with your own attorney and your own advisor before making any legal or financial decisions. Last but not least, the views and opinions that I express in this video are my own alone and don't necessarily reflect those of my law firm or any of my business partners. Alright guys, let's get right into it. Today we're going to be talking about how to analyze rental properties. Now before we jump into it, I just want to say that not everybody's going to agree with every concept that I'm going to talk about in this video, and that's okay. This is based on my own personal experience and my own research into rental property analysis. So take it as just one of many different sources that you can rely on in building up your own knowledge of the topic. So where should you start when it comes to analyzing rental properties? Well, you should always start with the end in mind. Ask yourself some very important questions. First of all, what is your goal? Are you looking for cash flow, or are you looking for appreciation? Or do you want both? Other questions you should ask yourself before you begin: do you plan to own or occupy the property, or will it be a pure investment for you? Do you want a rehab project, or do you want a turnkey property? Are you an experienced investor, or is this going to be your first deal? Do you have a full-time job? Are you going to manage the property yourself, or will you use property management? Are you just looking for a source of side income to supplement your job, or are you trying to build a portfolio to replace your income? Clear answers to these questions will help guide your search and analysis process. Two important concepts that I think you should keep in mind as you start your analysis are cash flow and appreciation. Cash flow is the income that a rental property generates on an ongoing basis after subtracting all expenses. This can be tracked on a monthly or an annual basis. Appreciation, on the other hand, is the increase in property's value over time. Now, there are two different types of appreciation that are generally recognized by investors. One is called organic appreciation. This is where a property increases in value without the investor having to do anything. The only thing the investor does is holds on to that property for a period of time, and over that time frame, the property increases in value. You've probably heard that real estate over time generally increases in value by 3 to 4% on average across the United States. So an example of organic appreciation would be buying a property 20 years ago and having that property increase in value by, say, $100,000 during that time frame. Forced appreciation, on the other hand, is something that is actively created by the investor. Some examples of forced appreciation might be increasing the number of units in a rental property, or it might be adding an addition to a building, or it might be adding a bedroom or a bathroom to an apartment. All of those things drive appreciation because of the perceived increase in value resulting from the improvements that you make to that property. Now, one interesting thing that I found over the years dealing with real estate is the apparent inverse relationship between cash flow and the potential for appreciation. The general rule seems to be that the more cash flow a potential property has, the less appreciation potential it will likely have, and vice versa. This is because desirable properties in desirable areas cost more relative to the income they bring in, which means they will generate less cash flow. But they will also likely have a higher likelihood of appreciation over time because they will continue to be more in demand. I'm sure you can find examples of this in your area right now. If you went online and searched for duplexes in a good school district in your area and then compared those duplexes to other similar duplexes in not so good area, or maybe an area that has a higher incidence of crime, you would see that the duplexes in the nicer areas are going to be more expensive than the duplexes in the not so nice area. But then if you also compare the difference between the rental income that the duplexes in the good area are bringing in comparison to the duplexes in the not so good area, you would see that the ratio in rent difference between those two areas and the price difference in those two areas is not the same. The price difference is likely to be a lot more pronounced than the difference in the rental income. And that is exactly my point. Higher priced, nicer areas are more likely to appreciate quicker than the lower priced, not so nice areas. But their rental income is not likely to go up at the same rate. And so when you buy properties in a nicer area, you are sacrificing cash flow in exchange for the likelihood of appreciation, and vice versa. Another thing that I've learned over the last 9 years is that there also appears to be an inverse relationship between the ease of management and the price or desirability of a property. The lower the price of a property, the more management it appears to require. And so my general rule has been that the more desirable a property is, which typically means more expensive, the less management it will require, and vice versa. The more desirable a property is, the more likely you are to get good quality tenants, and the less management those tenants will require. In other words, paying more for a property up front can save on management expenses and headaches over time. Now obviously this is a generality and there are exceptions to the rule. So with these concepts in mind, how do you actually analyze a rental property? Let's first start with some general rules of thumb. One important rule of thumb that a lot of investors tend to use is called the 2% rule, and also sometimes called the 1% rule. The 2% rule is a guideline that can help you decide whether a property might be a good cash flow property. The 2% rule says that you should only buy a property whose monthly gross rental income equals at least 2% of the purchase price. Conversely, the 1% rule is exactly the same, except you're lowering your expectation of your overall income from 2% to 1%. So let's look at some examples and see how these two rules apply. So example number 1, let's say the purchase price of a property is $200,000 and its monthly rental income is $2,100. So we take $2,100 and divide it by $200,000, and that equals to 1.05%. Now, if we were applying the 2% rule, this would not meet that rule, and this property would be a pass. In example number 2, the purchase price is $150,000, and its monthly rental income is $3,300. We take $303,000 divided by $150,000, and we get 2.2%. This property would meet the 2% rule, and you would look into it further. For the 1% rule, example number 1, we have a purchase price of $300,000, monthly rent of $1,600. So we take $1,600 divided by $300,000 and we get 0.5%. If we're applying the 1% rule, this property does not meet the 1% rule because it's only 0.5%. And then example number 2 is the same as example number 1 for the 2% rule. Again, purchase price of $200,000, monthly rent $2,100. You divide $2,100 by $200,000 and you get 1.05%, thereby meeting that 1% rule. So what does this actually mean for us? Why would you be using 2% versus 1%, and how does this help you in your analysis? Well, first of all, both rules should be used only as a quick assessment for whether or not you should be looking into this property any further, or if you should just pass and move on to the next property. They should not be the end of your analysis. The 2% rule makes sense when you're looking at properties in less desirable, lower income, blue-collar areas. This is because the price-to-income ratio in those areas is going to be higher than the price-to-income ratio in the nicer areas. The 2% rule is also a favorite of those investors who are more interested in cash flow rather than appreciation. So if that is you and you're after the maximum cash flow you can get, you should be probably applying the 2% rule, and you should also be looking in the lower class areas. In my area, generally speaking, these are the cities of Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Cohoes, Waterville, and Rensselaer. Again, I'm in upstate New York, near the capital of Albany. And again, this is just a generalization, and it does not mean that this will always be true in every single case. Conversely, the 1% rule makes more sense in the nicer areas with nicer school districts and nicer properties. In my area, generally speaking, these are the towns of Colony, Guilderland, Bethlehem, Niskayuna, Clifton Park, and so forth. This is the general rule that I have observed, but of course there are always exceptions to every rule. Since we're talking about rules of thumb for analyzing rental properties, another popular rule of thumb that a lot of investors like to use is called the dollar per unit rule. This is a rule that adheres to a specific dollar per unit number for deciding whether a building is worth considering. For example, some investors in my area use a $50,000 per unit rule. This means that an investor following this rule would be unwilling to pay more than $150,000 for a 3-unit building, $200,000 for a 4-unit building, and so forth. Now, the way that investors arrive at this rule is generally governed by the market itself. Experienced investors know that if they violate this rule, if they go over the dollar per unit value when they're buying a property, they're likely not going to be able to cash flow, or they won't be able to cash flow as well as they would like to. And a lot of this comes down to their personal experience. They know that in a particular area for a particular property class, they will end up spending a certain amount of money on expenses, and also that a certain unit is going to produce only a certain amount of rental income. And if they exceed the price that they pay for that unit, they're likely to lose money. And so they stick to this number unless there's something specific about a particular deal that will allow them to make more money than they usually would. Another very useful rule of thumb when it comes to analyzing rental properties is the 50% rule. This rule says that a property's expenses, not counting the mortgage expense, will on average equal 50% of the property's gross rent. So if a property's gross rent is $4,000 per month, for example, an investor can generally expect to spend $2,000 per month on various expenses. Again, this rule derives from the experiences of thousands of investors over decades of collective experience. What this rule allows you to do is to figure out very quickly whether or not a property is going to make cash flow or if it's going to cost you money. You would simply take off 50% of a property's gross stated income and then see if the remaining income is sufficient to cover your mortgage expense, and by how much. So in the example that I just mentioned, the remaining $2,000 per month has to be sufficient to account for the entire mortgage expense of principal and interest. If the principal and interest on this particular deal comes to, let's say, $1,700 per month, that means that your likely expected cash flow on this property is $300 per month. Again, $2,000 is going to expenses, $1,700 is going to the mortgage expense, and the remainder will be your cash flow. Now, if that property's mortgage expense exceeds $2,000, well, then you are most likely going to be losing money, and it's probably not worth your while to spend much time analyzing this property. So once you have decided that a property meets your selected rule or rules of thumb, you will need to start looking more closely at its income and expenses. When looking at a property's income, you should consider the property's current stated income, and you should also consider the property's potential future income as well. You may find that the current income is too high, in other words, inconsistent with income of other similar properties. This may be a red flag that either the income is not accurate or there's some piece of information you are missing. So let's say, for example, that you're looking at a 3-unit building and the stated income of each of those units is $1,000 per unit per month. But you know that similar triplexes in this area with the same types of apartments generally rent for $800 per month per unit. So you need to question further whether the $1,000 of stated income per month per unit for the property you're looking at is actually market value or not, or if there's something else going on. Now, it's possible that the $800 per month that you expect in the market does not include utilities. But in the property that you're considering buying, the landlord actually covers the electric and the gas for the tenants. And that cost may be the difference between the $800 that you're expecting and the $1,000 per month per unit that this property is actually bringing in. The point is that you should be looking deeper if you see a discrepancy between what you're expecting based on what the market is showing and what this property owner or the agent is showing you with regard to this specific property. And the same thing also applies if the stated income for a particular property that you're looking at is lower than what you're expecting. Now, it may be that the owner of this property is not very good at keeping up with market rents, or it may be that there's some other defect or issue with the property that is producing lower rents than you would normally expect. Again, this is something that you should investigate and try to figure out before you end up making the purchase. The best deals are the ones that are priced according to their current income, but the income is much lower than it should be, or ones where, with some improvements, the rents can be significantly increased. Ideally, when updating or upgrading a property, you want to be able to recoup your investment through increased rents within 1 to 3 years. It wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense for you to buy a property for, say, $200,000 and then spend another $100,000 improving it, upgrading it, maybe putting on an addition, only to realize an increase in rents of just $200 per month. At that rate, it would take you nearly 42 years to make up the cost of the improvements on this property through the increase in the rents alone. Obviously, that would not be a good investment on your part. So now that you've considered the income that a property produces, you should next consider its expenses. A rental property's expenses will make or break the deal. A property can look great at first glance with a reasonable price and high income. But if its expenses are out of control, a great deal can turn into a dog in an instant. Here's a sample of a list of possible landlord-paid expenses that a property may have. They include taxes, insurance, garbage and recycling, water and sewer, gas, electric, oil or propane, HOA fees, mortgage, maintenance, repairs, capital expenditures, management, and vacancy. Not all of these expenses will be listed in the typical MLS listing or for sale by owner listing. And if you're looking at an off-market deal, you will have to dig up all of these expenses on your own. Tax expenses can be obtained by calling the treasurer of the municipality where the building is located. You should be able to get copies of the tax bills if you ask. Some municipalities and school districts also make this information available online. Insurance is likely to be an estimate, as it will vary somewhat based on the owner and the owner's claim history. So even if you have a copy of the seller's insurance bill, it doesn't mean that when you go to buy the property, you're going to get a similar price from your insurance company. If a property is near a body of water, you should also utilize the free FEMA flood map website to determine whether the property is in a flood zone and will require flood insurance. If the property is near a body of water, you should definitely check it out. If you find that a property is in the flood zone, you should try to get an insurance quote from a flood insurance company such as Flood Simple. Flood Simple is a private company that often has much better rates than the federally funded flood insurance programs. Now, of course, not all mortgage insurers will allow you to use a private flood insurance company for your flood insurance, and that is something you should definitely be following up on with your chosen lender. It is rare for a rental property to be subject to HOA fees, but it is worth checking around to see if it is, if you have any doubts. For an estimate of mortgage costs, you can reach out to a loan officer at a local bank, or you can use a free calculator such as the Bankrate Loan Amortization Calculator. You will need to have some idea what interest rate your bank is likely to charge you, and also what the term of your loan is going to be. Keep in mind that if you are planning to own your property in an LLC, your loan terms are likely to be a lot more stringent than if you're owning it in your own name. For example, the maximum terms of commercial loans in my area are 20 to 25 years, with 5-year resets for interest and or balloon payments. Whereas if you plan to own the property in your own name, you may be able to obtain a 30-year mortgage without any balloon payments or resets to your interest rate. So when we're talking about analyzing rental properties with regard to their expenses, it's very important to not forget vacancy. Vacancy is the cost of your property being without tenants for some period of time. This is hard to estimate exactly because actual vacancy on a particular property can fluctuate year to year. So most investors use a ballpark estimate somewhere around 5 to 10% of a property's gross rental income. Now, there are two different types of vacancy. One is physical vacancy, which occurs between the time your tenant vacates your rental property and the time you're able to find a new tenant. And then there's also an economic vacancy. This occurs when your rental, which may have a tenant in it, is nevertheless not producing any income. This is a common occurrence right now given the pandemic and the various restrictions on evictions state to state and nationwide. Both of these vacancy types should be accounted for in your estimated calculation of a property's vacancy rate. However, in order to properly estimate a vacancy rate, you need to also become familiar with the particular asset class of the property. Is it a single family? Is it a 2 to 4 unit? Or is it an apartment building? You also should consider the location of the property. Some locations may experience much higher than normal vacancy rates because they are overbuilt, or because they're blighted, or because of other conditions. For example, state laws favoring tenants over landlords. Obviously, it doesn't hurt to be more conservative and overestimate vacancy rather than underestimate it. I also think it makes sense to overestimate vacancy in the current rental climate going into 2021 and beyond, specifically because of the pandemic and the state-by-state and countrywide eviction restrictions. It may very well be that some properties will experience a 15% vacancy or higher when all of these variables are taken into account. Two other categories of expenses that you should definitely take into account, but that are not always easy to calculate ahead of time, are repairs and maintenance. Repairs is a category of expenses which is pretty much self-explanatory. It is the cost of repairing the property. However, it can also be very difficult to estimate precisely. One year a property may need more repairs than another year, depending on what happens at the property. Also, age of the property is a big factor in whether or not the mechanicals or components of the property are going to need repairs and how much they're going to cost. If a property is 100 years old, it's more likely going to need a lot more repairs than the property that's only 20 years old. Most seasoned investors estimate between 5 and 10% of a property's gross rent toward repairs. Some investors combine their estimate for maintenance together with repairs. This is fine, but you can typically get a closer ballpark number by figuring out what maintenance the property requires and get contractor quotes, or if you have experience with the types of maintenance costs involved, simply estimate based on your experience. Typical maintenance includes snow removal, lawn care, leaf removal, general cleaning, and so forth. The next expense is one of the most underestimated expenses of all rental property expenses, and that is capital expenditures. This category confuses a lot of people, and a lot of novice investors do not account for it at all. This is a huge mistake. Capital expenditures are expenditures for replacements of mechanicals and building components, in other words, roofs, furnaces, hot water tanks, appliances, flooring, doors, windows, etc. And these replacements occur when those components have reached the end of their useful lives. Most investors think that because they accounted for repairs, they have covered themselves for capital expenditure expenses. And this is simply not true. Most of the time, they've grossly underestimated the cost of replacing these items. The fact of the matter is that every single component of a building, from large to small, has a finite life. And if the property is to continue to function, every single component will at some point need to be replaced, and that replacement will cost the owner money. Let's say you buy a 6-unit property with a roof that is 10 years old. Because of the size of the building, a new roof is going to cost $25,000. Let's also assume that this roof will need to be replaced in 15 years. In order to properly account for this future cost and ensure that the property, rather than your personal finances, pay for it, you should factor the cost of this expense into your monthly cost for the building. To do that, we would take $25,000, the cost of a new roof, divided by 15 years, and then divided again by 12 months. The resulting number is $138.89. This is the monthly capital expenditure cost of replacing this roof on this particular building. In order to calculate the total CapEx on a property, you would need to perform this analysis on virtually every component of a given building. Since doing this is difficult when you don't have all of the necessary information about the particular components of the building, and because it would take you an enormous amount of time to actually calculate this, you can use an estimate for this cost metric as well. Now, an estimate is never going to be as exact as actually doing the actual calculations based on specific data, but sometimes that's all you can do. So a lot of investors typically will allocate approximately 10% toward capital expenditures of a property's gross rental income. However, again, this is just a generality, and any relevant specific information about the subject property can change this estimate up or down. The older the building is and the older its components are, the higher the CapEx estimate should be on that building. So if you have a 100-year-old building where its plumbing and electrical haven't been updated in the last 50 years, then you probably need to estimate a lot more toward CapEx, maybe 15% or 20%, than you would normally estimate if it was a newer building. Finally, the last expense that I'm going to talk about is property management. Now, property management refers to a service provided by a company or an individual who offers to manage the property for the owner for a fee. These fees can vary, but typically include a monthly percentage of total gross rents, somewhere between 8% and 10%, plus additional one-time fees that are charged on an as-needed basis. The one-time fees can include leasing fees, usually 1 month of rent, eviction fees covering the cost of service, court filings and attorney's fees, and repair and maintenance fees, which are typically hourly fees charged for the use of the property's manager's contractors. After adding up all of these fees, it's not unusual for the final annual cost to be somewhere between 12% and 15% of gross rents. Generally, I encourage new investors not to use property management because, as you will see in a minute, property management fees can not only eat into your profit, but can completely eliminate it. So adding up all the costs and all the different fees and expenses, we have vacancy, somewhere between 5 and 10% during normal years, but possibly in 2021 and going forward, it might be even higher, maybe 15%. Repairs and maintenance, somewhere between 10 and 20%. Capital expenditures, between 10 and 20%. Property management, between 12 and 15%. And so just those costs alone total somewhere between 37% and 65% of a property's annual gross rents. This doesn't even account for all the other costs: taxes, insurance, garbage, sewer, water, utilities, and mortgage. This is why it is so critically important to do proper due diligence on your rental properties before purchasing them. And in reality, profit margins on a rental property, for most people, are usually not greater than 15% anyway. based on what we have seen, using property management typically wipes out most, if not all, of that profit. So now that you know all the different rules of thumb and the different expenses that you should be accounting for, let's apply them to a specific example. All right, so here I have an example of a rental property that is currently on the market in my area. Now the listing says that the asking price is $129,000. It is a 2-family, so it's a duplex. And it says that its monthly rent is $850 for one unit and $700 for the other unit. Now, the listing says that the rental prices are estimated, so I'm not sure if that's because the units are vacant right now or because they're actually producing less than the stated income, but let's just assume for the sake of this example that the actual rents are $850 and $700 per month. Together, they combine to $1,550 of gross rental income per month. Let's also assume that we're not going to offer the full asking price for this property. Let's just say that we're going to go in at $120,000 instead of $129,000. So we're giving ourselves a $9,000 discount, mainly for the purpose of making it easier for the calculations, but also it's more realistic that way that you're not necessarily giving the full asking price for this property. So if we apply the 2% rule and the 1% rule, these are the results. 2% rule, we can tell that this property would fail. The 1% rule, it would actually pass. So that is taking $1,550 and dividing it by $120,000, which is our purchase price, we get a percentage of 1.29%. So again, higher than the 1%, but lower than the 2%. Now, in terms of expenses, we actually don't have a ton of information that is provided to us in this listing. The agent only provided us with the information about its taxes, which it says are $3,000, and again, that's just an estimate. So in order to figure out what the actual taxes are, you would do what I mentioned earlier in this video, which is you would either call the treasurer or you would go online and try to find the tax bill for this property. But again, for our purposes, let's just assume that the $3,000 in taxes that's listed here is the actual number for taxes for this particular property. So $3,000 per year in taxes comes to $250 per month in taxes. The next thing on my list of expenses is insurance. Again, this agent doesn't list the cost of insurance, and it probably wouldn't be necessarily accurate for us anyway because we need to tailor the insurance to us. Now I know that for a property like this in my area, I can probably obtain insurance for about $800 per year, which would come to $66.67 per month. It may be different for you, but again, it's something that you may want to talk to an insurance broker if you have one, and if you don't, it might be a good time to find one, and just run some ballparks with them and maybe see what they would price things at. The next item on my expense list is water and sewer. Now, in our area, typically this is an expense of the landlord, and most properties are not sub-metered, so a multifamily property would almost certainly come with one bill for both units, and that would be an expense of the owner. So in this case, I know that water and sewer for this particular area comes to about $83.33 per month. In fact, in the city of Watervliet, the city actually charges a per unit amount for water and sewer twice per year. So I just did some quick math and came up with this monthly number. The next item on my list is vacancy rate. Now, I am probably underestimating this. This should probably be higher given the current climate. I'm keeping it at 5% again for example purposes, but if we up this to 10%, let's say, then we would just be doubling this monthly number. And we would be looking at an amount that is a little bit over $150 per month. The next item is maintenance and repairs, and I'm estimating 20%, which then comes to $310 per month. The next item is capital expenditures. I am estimating 10%, which in this case would be $155 per month. Finally, the last expense here is the mortgage expense. And my assumptions for this expense are that it's going to be an 80% loan-to-value loan that is going to be amortized over 30 years at 5% interest rate. Now, this of course depends on your specific situation, what kind of terms you can get from a bank, and also whether or not you're going to own the property in your own name or in the name of an entity. For the purpose of this calculation, I am assuming that the buyer is going to be holding this property in their own name and that they're going to be getting a residential mortgage as opposed to a commercial mortgage, again, in their own name. They're going to be putting 20% down and financing the rest of it. So at 80% loan to value, our principal loan amount is going to be $96,000. And if you use an amortization calculator, taking $96,000 at 5%, amortized over 30 years, you get a monthly mortgage payment of $515.35. So adding all of these different costs together, we arrive at a monthly expense cost of $1,457.85. Now, if I were to tweak the vacancy rate from 5% to 10%, that would mean that our total expenses will go up by $77.50. So let's just say we did that. That means that our total costs on this property, with every single cost calculated and included, are $1,535.35. Now remember, our monthly rental income on this property is $1,550. So if we subtract the total expenses from the total income, we would be left with something less than $15 per month. And I don't know about you, but certainly for me, this would not be worth the investment. And given the fact that a lot of these costs are just plain estimates and they could potentially be higher, I would not be very comfortable at all buying this property for this price. Now, of course, it is possible that the estimated rental income from each of these apartments is inaccurate and that the agent who estimated it didn't have it right. And in which case, you're going to want to know what the actual income should be, or what the market income should be. And also, it's possible that if you've made some improvements to the property, maybe you can rent this property out for more than the $700 per month for one unit and the $850 per month for the other unit. But again, for the purposes of this calculation, I'm just assuming that this is the correct market price for the rents for this particular property. And if that's the case, then this property certainly is a no-go for me. One other thought is that if we go back to the beginning where I mentioned the 2% rule and the 1% rule, in this case, for this particular property, because I know the area where this property is located, I would likely not be using the 1% rule. It's not the nicer area, it is not the better school district, and it certainly does not look like a premium property. The property looks older, it looks like it probably needs a bunch of maintenance, and it's going to need a lot more care and a lot more upgrades in the future. So for this reason, I would probably be using the 2% rule, in which case I would have failed this property before I even jumped into the calculation. Again, I did this for the purpose of demonstrating how I would go about doing the calculations if this property did meet one of my initial rules of thumb. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. And as I mentioned in a few of my other videos, if you're concerned with the direction in which real estate is going right now with regard to the pandemic, the eviction bans, and the overall sentiment against real estate investors and landlords, you may want to consider diversifying your investments between real estate and other classes of investment. For example, stocks and bonds, ETFs, or mutual funds. If you do decide to do that, I would recommend using a platform like Webull. Webull is a commission-free platform where you can trade individual stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, and more. And right now, if you sign up for Webull using my link in the description below and deposit at least $100 on the platform, you will get 2 free stocks valued anywhere between $8 and $1,600 each at no extra cost to you. Additionally, as a special promotion right now, if you open a Webull account, regardless of whether you fund it, between the time this video is published and November 30th, 2020, using my link, you will get 2 additional stocks valued between $2.50 and $250 each. If you don't already have a Webull account, use the link in the description below to sign up. You will support my channel and you will also get 2 free stocks in the process. With that said, guys, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.